Good morning. We will begin the meeting of the Executive and Finance Committee of the Downtown Development Authority. And I will ask staff to call the roll, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Peter Dewan,
Present.
Jim Kroom,
Present.
George Lahanas,
Present.
and Michael Kruger. That completes the roll call.
Great, thank you. We have the agenda as presented by staff. I move to approve the agenda and ask for a second.
Second.
It's been seconded, I
George.
believe, by George. All those in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
We will move on to the section for public comment. And as we have done in previous meetings of the Downtown Development Authority, we have a time limit with regard to public comment offered by the community in an effort to try and have an efficient meeting. So we will continue that same practice of a 5-minute limit. And the technical language is in order to maintain the order of an online public meeting. We move to adopt a rule pursuant to MCL 15.263, limiting public comment to 5 minutes per individual for all electronic meetings held by the DDA Executive Finance Committee, and ask for a second on that motion.
Support.
It's been supported by Jim Kroom. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, we will go on now to public comment. Is there anyone wishing to address the Exec and Finance Committee?
Yes, Chair, there's one attendee in the queue.
Okay,
Our first caller is caller with the last 3 digits of 963. Caller with the last 3 digits of 963, you will be unmuted and given 5 minutes to speak. If you do not wish to speak, please say pass. Caller with the last 3 digits of 963, your time begins now.
welcome. Hello, caller.
Caller 963,
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I was muted. This is Alice Dreger. I guess it looks from the agenda coming up proposed for next week like you're going to maybe deal with the evergreen properties in another phase, but I just wanted to express the sense that we really need to be asking now whether or not the basic terms of this deal are something that council is going to tolerate, and whether or not we're going to end up in the same position as we did last time with the Royal Oaxaca deal going on for a year and then finding the council does not have the taste for the basic terms of the deal or doesn't have faith in the developers. So, you know, when Ruth Beyer was mayor, she said what she was not interested in was a bait and switch on this. She was particularly not interested in having a situation where offices were proposed and then what ended up being built as student housing. But in some ways, what we've got is something of at least a getting of the foot in the door and then a changing of the terms that are being asked for. So as you all know, the River Caddis project is the only project that ended up standing essentially in response to the RFP. But that's because the RFP was written in a very particular way to attract a very narrow, I think, set of proposals. And so what's happened now is the River Caddis people proposed to build their own parking, but now they want us to deal with the cost of parking and figure out where to build that parking. And in addition to that, they've made clear they want to ask back potentially for all of the money on the land cost. They won't be able to do that through TIF directly as far as the state rules of TIF are concerned. However, I suspect they're looking to do some sort of fancy deal similar to what we did on Center City with regard to finding some way to structure the financing so they get paid back for the land. Well, if that's the case, if we're going to basically end up eating the cost of the land through taxes, then this gives us an incredible opportunity to consider what else we might be doing with that property that might be more beneficial to the city. I think we all agree downtown office, great idea. Is it really feasible? If it were feasible by this point, I think from this point we would have seen from the developer real information about who the tenants are going to be and real movement forward. We haven't seen that. If we're going to end up with office space built that is basically built on our dime, then potentially what we're looking at is very little incentive for the developer to have to make sure, absolutely sure, that that space is occupied. And in that case, we could end up with dead office space, which is a serious concern for me. The last thing we need is unoccupied space in our downtown. Last time we had the developer continue to spend money hand over fist, they claimed, developing a proposal for which council ultimately had no interest or no say. You'll remember that in the end, it was killed not by the DDA, but it was killed by a vote of council. And so I think as soon as possible, we have to figure out what are the major terms these folks are really asking for, and does it make sense for us to limit ourselves continually to this? I asked Heather Pope whether or not it's possible for the DDA to actually pay the debt directly out of the DDA millage, and the answer is yes. There would have to be major restructuring of budgeting going on, but there is not the necessity to have the city bail out the DDA in the event we can't immediately pay the debt. So I really think there's a question here of whether or not the DDA should continue to do what it's always done, which is limp along on these exclusive deals, hoping something pans out, when we have the potential here to do something, I think, pretty exciting. If it turns out the city can afford to, and is going to be asked anyway, to essentially pay for the project's land costs out of TIF, then we have an opportunity to do something really exciting, which could include senior housing, could include new space for primetime seniors, new space for helping hands, potentially parking, potentially more modern income housing, something that would really benefit the city that would be occupied. So those are my concerns, and I appreciate you listening to me. Thanks. You can turn me off now.
Thank you, Alice. Are there any additional callers?
No, Chair, that completes the caller queue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for calling in. We will move on to our financial report from June 2020. And Heather, are you going to review that for us? Provide an overview? Is it Chad? Someone's muted.
Sorry, it was me.
Okay.
So, yes. So this is just another version of our June financial report. If you recall, we do a preliminary financial report. We presented that in July for the year ending, fiscal year ending June of 2020. Not a lot changed. There was a few items some bills that came in after that have been paid and we're reconciling. But overall, there were no substantial changes from the previous version of this. And just as a reminder, we will again take a look at this report next month. And if there are no changes at that point and everything's been closed out, this report would not be brought back to the DDA until after the audit's complete. And at that point, we would adopt the June Treasurer's report at that time.
Okay, are there any questions regarding the 2020, June 2020 budget of staff?
Just a follow-up to Ms. Drager's comments. Heather, is there anything else to add concerning discussion about the topic of DDA sort of self-funding the bonds? That may not be the right term, but any other follow-up on that or things that we should know?
No, it was just from the standpoint of, as you recall, currently in our budgets, we have a project development fund, which is usually about can go up to $400,000 a year, and that's where we fund projects such as sidewalk projects and benches and all these different improvements that we do in the downtown. And if the DDA chose to, they could take those funds and not allocate it for a project development fund and just allocate them for an evergreen project. So it's just based on how the DDA itself wants to allocate those funds that are available for projects.
I see. So I mean, this is stating the obvious, but at the present point, we have the $5.5 million debt, if you will, and we're looking to one of the proposals is to have a developer, this developer, another developer pay that out in whole We see proposals changing here slightly, a bit, to put it mildly. And then we also know that other DDAs, and I think I've mentioned this before, other DDAs, and this is not uncommon, will actually purchase property, acquire property, and then allow either a very below market rate lease or cost-free lease for a certain number of years, or will actually allow or add it into the deal, if you will, to allow developers to develop a project that might not otherwise be developed due to financial issues. So it's not uncommon for a DDA to take the route that you're talking about. I guess the funding would be different. We would simply fund the repayment through our normal annual cash flows of, as you say, 200,000 to 400,000. And I'm not advocating that. I just wanted to follow up on the idea that came from the public and just talk through that in my own mind. So just something to bear in mind. And I guess I'd also add that as I see it now, we have the process of hiring counsel, and there has been discussion. The public comment was, the agreement's changing. We have a certain development agreement that has some terms that may not be favorable to the city. Don't think that's uncommon coming as an initial draft, but I would say in response that hopefully our council, our council and we will go through that, and city staff will go through that to fully negotiate any development agreement and any purchase agreement. And that can include different ideas about what goes in there and so on. So I think the timeline is that we still have an exclusivity period ongoing. Within that period, we will have counsel and we will have a review of that document. The other options that are suggested as potentialities, and they're much appreciated. I love that Alice is involved in thinking about this. Those would come. I mean, we can think about them during the exclusive period, but in good faith, when we think about them, we should be thinking about them with our exclusive partner at this point. After that period expires, we're obviously free to do anything we wish. So I view it as more to come on that. So with that, that's kind of the way I view this. So thank you for allowing me to.
You went mute there the last few seconds, Jim, but.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, Peter. And hopefully it wasn't more than 5 minutes.
No, thank you for the great analysis, Jim, and comments. Any additional questions of staff with regard to the budget? Seeing none, let's move on then, Heather, to the July 2020 budget performance report.
Yeah, so you won't see a lot of activity. This is our first month of our fiscal year. So we did receive our property tax TIF 1 and TIF 2 in July. We'll see some adjustments, but we won't see really any activity on those accounts until January. We received some lease rental income for the Evergreen properties. Moving on to our expenses. Our typical transfers of our wages and our benefits. You'll see some of the charges that were in our previous month also for contingent wages, and those were for the employees as part of the cleaning program for the outdoor dining area. I want to bring you down though to your project development fund. I just want to point out, you'll see we have a credit here of $21,020.80. And this is because we had one business that did not reopen, and they received a business relief grant of $2,500. So they returned that check to the DDA, so the credit back. And then this also is showing the credit of the carryover of the funds that we have set aside to purchase the bike racks, some additional trash cans and that, which was part of the Harbor Harbor Bay Center City development projects. So just wanted to point that out because it does look a little different. But what I do want to take you down to now is our actual project development fund breakdown. So this fiscal year, our primary budget that we allocated for fiscal year 21 is $255,265. And in addition to that, we have some carryover. I'll just go through that quickly here. We have a facade improvement program carryover for one project that will be wrapped up here in the next month of $947.22. Our Grand River Sidewalk project, we just wrapped that up and we'll be doing the final pay app on that. And so that's been carried over there for $34,210. I did want to point out that we allocated for that project $210,000 as part of the project, but it did come in under budget. So after our final payment, there'll be about $14,600 that will just go back into the fund balance from that line item. Our Artist Alley, this is something that we've carried over for several years. And it relates to the pedestrian alley in the 500 block in the Grove Alley activities that take place in those two specific locations. Again, there's that Harbor Bay downtown amenities and engineering invoice that we received credit for of $18,627. We still have $121,563 in our business relief program. And then our outdoor dining, as you recall, back in, I believe it was June, the DDA took action to allocate $20,000 for our outdoor dining program along Albert Avenue for the purpose of sanitation of that area. And so that project is now wrapping up. The outdoor dining closed August 12th. And so those funds, you'll see those expensed out during July and August. So on our next report, that should be zeroed out. Any questions?
What are we contemplating doing with the remaining business relief program funds? Remind me.
Well, I know that we've done the 2 rounds of grants, and then we did the $20,000 for outdoor dining. But I believe the board still needs to have further discussion on what they want to use those funds for. I know that staff's going to provide an update to the board about the number of activities that we're trying to continue to do to support the downtown businesses. And so there may be some opportunity for the DDA to fund those types of activities.
One thought I would quickly have is the Downtown Ambassador Program, which begins tonight. We thought might be funded by the DMB, but I think the DMB elected not to fund that. But that would be a good opportunity because obviously we're paying staffing to have people, encouraging people to wear masks and giving out masks in the downtown over the next couple of weeks, actually for the first month. So that might be one opportunity for business support.
Yeah, George, we did talk about that at the DMB, and I guess the thought was that, we just found it, number one, based on the size of the DMB budget, that it probably is more appropriately suited to be funded by other sources. And secondly, there were questions as to why the businesses would actually fund the ambassador program. Should that, because it was a city council decision, should that be more or less funded by the entire community in support of its downtown, meaning funds from the general city budget, since it was council and the mayor that determined that we should go in the ambassador direction. I'm not saying it's not a great project. It's just a question of the size of the budget and where it should come from and how it felt. And with the DMB using funds for other purposes, some of those funds have come from the DDA, which is much appreciated by the DMB. And we'll get into more discussion on that over the course of maybe the next week or so. But there are ideas for programs and also ideas for marketing and getting marketing assistance. And again, it would be professional assistance from an outside source, because this COVID thing and how to reopen a downtown and how to do it safely and so on is such a now a cutting edge issue. It's important to figure out how we safely bring people back downtown, how we, marketing's the wrong word, but how we educate folks on bringing them downtown, which certainly benefits the businesses. So there is an opportunity to work with the DMB, I think, maybe as a frontline entity to utilize some of those funds. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Jim. I have a question since we're talking about the budget and following down in our agenda, we're going to be talking about retaining legal counsel. Can we discuss in terms of how we're going to fund this? And just a couple of questions. I know the present city attorney is on retainer. The DDA pays a portion of that. I don't know what that amount is, and maybe if you can illustrate what our proportional share is for paying for the city attorney. And then I think we need to have a discussion about what our thoughts are with regard to not only paying for the firm that we ultimately select, and then how that cost will be shared with the city, considering that the city is presently undergoing the same review of a potential new city attorney. So, and I don't know who leads that conversation, but those are some thoughts and questions I have.
Great question, Peter. And we should also bring that forward. I mean, whatever we discuss, probably bring that forward with the whole DDA. So
Right.
Just for staff to bear in mind, we should have that discussion.
So just to give you a reference. Oh, Jim muted. Just for a reference, currently in our fiscal year 21 budget, we have legal services budgeted at $12,000.
So that's $1,000 a month?
Yes.
And how much do we spend typically in a typical year? Do we spend it all?
Some years yes, some years no. I believe, let me go back to the June financial report here real quick.
And is that outside of what some sort of allocation to the city attorney is? Are they two separate sources?
So for our legal services year ending June 30th, 2020, budgeted $7,000. We actually end up spending $12,810. And that is our portion of the time that is billed for the DDA activities.
Okay.
So that the city attorney then bills the city, obviously, and for those billings that are involved at DDA, they're simply directly allocated to us.
Correct.
And when extra money is needed, as in the past year, we simply shift it from other sources within our budget.
Yes.
Are those, it appears that the previous year we allocated $7,000, but we retained $12,000 worth of services. So the question is, how is that on the basis of hours spent, or how are the legal expenses determined?
So there's bills that are provided monthly from the city attorney's office, and it breaks down, DDA, general fund, housing, all of that. And based on those hours billed, the work billed to the DDA pays for only that portion. So last year, the DDA, we had our budget set at 7, and this is based on looking at what we had expensed in prior years and what we felt comfortable with. But if you recall, last year we had a lot of work surrounding the previous proposal that was received for the Evergreen properties. So that would have included an increase in those expenses. So this year, looking at our budget for legal services, just looking at what we've used and working with our finance department, we came up with a budget number of $12,000 for this year, based on, at that time, the current arrangement that the city of East Lansing had with the city attorney, Tom Eaton's office.
Okay. And so just hypothetically, if we retain the services of a new firm, um, depending on how that firm is used by the DDA, and if we exceed what we've allocated, those monies will then come out of which fund of the DDA?
Our fund balance, or if we choose to, we could make an adjustment to our project development fund. If you recall, in our project development fund, we always have a line that is to be determined. So in the case of this current fiscal year, which report, which started July 1, we have within this account, our projects to be determined $67,615. So we could pull monies from that line item budget and reallocate it to our legal services line item budget.
Okay. And just as another, maybe I'll save some other questions I have when we get to the discussion about legal services. So any other questions of staff on the budget?
No, Heather, thanks for having a great command of the budget. That's so helpful to lead us through that. And clearly the project funds could be available. I mean, essentially hiring a lawyer is part of a project. So it's pretty consistent with what we have going. The final question I would have is on the properties that the DDA owns now and that are occupied. Are there any changes in the cash flows there? In other words, that they're still occupied and money's coming in?
Yes, so those properties are still occupied with the exception, if you recall, we chose not to rent this year 334 Evergreen. So we'll have, minimal expenses just for winterizing them, keep making sure that, they're secure and all of that. But otherwise, all the remaining houses in 314 Evergreen have leases on them, so.
Thanks, sounds good.
Thank you, Heather. Let's move on to our agenda for next week's DDA meeting, the August 27th meeting. And Heather, are you going to lead us through this?
I believe Adam's going to.
Oh, Adam, I'm sorry, Adam.
Oh, no worries. A few of us on this call here. Yeah, so next week, we'll be discussing the written communications. We've received 2 so far. And then the business agenda, the Evergreen Phase 1 proposal, and then the 100 West Grand River SUP, Monday Street Food LLC, the 500 Block Refuge Room doors, and then of course the legal services RFQ-P, that review, and then the Evergreen property management at each address. We'll also have updates from the subcommittees to those reports.
Okay. Are the property management contracts up for review?
Yeah, so it's just, we always enter into a 1-year contract.
Okay.
The management services, so we're just renewing those with a few slight adjustments based on the way we're going to be having Quasar 334 Evergreen for us because it's not an active, there won't be occupants in that property. So we're adjusting how they're reimbursed each month for expense or for their management fee. And then 314 Evergreen is asking for an increase, $5 an hour for both labor and groundskeeping, which kind of lines up with the CPI increase. So they're just requesting that. And so I'm just working through, they're the same standard property management agreements though, so.
And what is, I'm not familiar with Monday's Street Food LLC. What is that referencing?
So sure, so that is, we received a application for a food truck. And if you recall this past, I think it was this past winter, the Public Policy Market Development Committee was the committee that initially reviewed the concessionaire and food truck applications. And they made a recommendation, which was approved by the DDA, that all food truck and concessionary applications, when they come in, go directly to the full DDA board. So I'll be preparing an overview of the request along with the application, and it will be the board will do a full review of it and take action at their meeting next Thursday.
Great. Okay, any questions about the agenda for next week's meeting?
Nope.
Seeing that, we'll move on to the legal services RFQP, the submissions that we've received. And Adam, are you going to help us with that?
Yeah, so hopefully you guys all received the memo and then the RFPs the responses that we received. If you recall, we originally issued it with a deadline of July 15th. We only received 2 responses, so to solicit more responses, we then extended that deadline to August 4th. And then in the end, we ended up receiving 4 responses. And in the memo you see here, you can see we did our best to quantify the costs associated with each response. Those costs some of them are on a sliding scale depending on which kind of staff will be working on the project. But we provided a minimum maximum rate. And then if there was a flat or blended rate, as you can see, we provided that as well. I do want to note that each response, they did indicate that they were flexible to other funding structures if desired.
So it might help with the clarification of, can you define a blended rate?
Yeah, so I believe, like if you look at JK Winners, they have your senior attorney, the associate attorney, legal assistants, and so on. What a blended rate, I believe, is they blend those rates together to kind of come up with an average, kind of, if you will, to apply,
Okay.
yeah, towards an hourly rate.
Okay, it's not, well, it could be dependent upon the legal services that are provided. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. A lot of them indicated that they would have a better understanding of, the funding structure once they get a complete scope of work, a better understanding of the scope of work that this will entail.
So what the DDA has experienced forever has been a city attorney that's providing a range of legal services, which would include attending meetings, providing legal counsel during those meetings, helping in the drafting of development agreements, helping in the review of TIF agreements. So all of the firms, dependent upon the services they're providing, we would either have a blended rate or anticipate different hourly rates, or are they just simply on retainer?
Well, each response, provides a blended rate, and then some of them actually say, we're open to a retainer, being on retainer, hourly rate, using a flat rate, travel expenses, or were not included in some of the responses. So did that answer your question, Chair?
Yeah, that's great. And so as far as the individual responses, have you provided an analysis on any of these other than their actual response to the RFP?
As far as what kind of analysis are you referring to?
Just if from staff's perspective, any thoughts that you would impart to the DDA in making our decision?
Well, I was approaching this because previously we discussed staff not making a recommendation, and I'm not sure if you still want to proceed with that route or not.
No, I just curious.
Yeah, I would say one that really stood out to me would be the Foster and Swift. I thought it was a really well prepared proposal.
Are there any comments from board members? I think I've reviewed all of the responses. I have in my own mind a ranking of how I look at each and every firm, and I'm grateful for all of their responses. I think each firm brings their own area of expertise and special skill set. So what makes sense to me is that the full DDA will weigh in next week and ultimately make the decision. So I guess the question we have today, is there additional information that we need to provide the full DDA to arrive at making that decision in an objective manner? And I just kind of throw that out as a question to other exec and finance committee members.
One of my questions is, do we intend to have these folks present at all of our meetings? Is this going to be like a mini city council where we have the city attorney sitting all the time? Or is it going to be the city attorney will come when requested? Or how is that going to work? Because I'm conscious of the price, and Tom Yaden's firm was a very good value. What's the price? What are we going to be using the attorney? How often are we going to be using them?
Well, I know in part of our conversations, there was the thought that the DDA at its own discretion could go out and retain legal counsel in areas where we may need a little more heavy lifting, or firms that perhaps have a certain area of expertise on specific items that are before the DDA. So I think that question still needs to be resolved by the full DDA. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, George, good question. I view it similar to what Peter's described, so that these current folks are different from, or could be different from, who the city ultimately hires for its city attorney. It may be the case, and I think we need to think through it, but it may be the case that we use the city attorney in similar fashion to how we used Tom in the past. So that's identical, and we can all envision that. And then this council would be used for those specialty areas. And would they attend every meeting? I wouldn't contemplate they would, unless we're hot and heavy into real estate development work. And then would they need to attend? They could do it by phone, depending on their travel arrangements that are negotiated, or in person if it's valuable or needed. Who knows how long we'll be in this Zoom format? But so does that help you think through it?
Yeah. So yeah, it does. So I just was concerned about somebody sitting at all the meetings, and then the price. Obviously, I'm price sensitive because we would be potentially eating up a bit of our money. But I think that's helpful for me.
So I could, Peter. I think I always need to disclose that I used to be with the Foster law firm, and that has I've been gone from there for 20 years. So there is no conflict, but I do want people to know that I used to be at that firm, and they are a very good firm and very strong in the municipal area. And as other DDA members have looked at this, they may have, everyone's going to have their ranking, as Peter does. I've been through them. I have my concept of ranking, and I do have a thought that we do, and we do have a situation where the city's hiring its own attorney, and the DDA and BRA are hiring their own attorney. So we could get right back into the same situation where the city has selected a law firm, and that law firm is also desirable for us. And so I think we need to bear in mind that our goal is to have one of the facets of our goals in hiring our own counsel is to have it be separate from the city lawyer for conflict purposes and for advice purposes and so on. So that will probably weigh into my decision as to who the city might pick. Although we won't know that by the time we make our decision. And
when will the Thank you, Jim. When will the city make their determination, George?
I would guess that over the next 2 weeks would likely be the time frame they're going to try. It's closing on Friday for the RFPs. So I'm guessing that they're going to need to be having some special meetings over the next couple of weeks. That's not a firm date, but I would guess 2 to 3 weeks they'd have to be making a decision.
And can we have a discussion? Jim alluded to it of perhaps the city selecting a different firm or the DDA making the determination to select a different firm than the city would select. So we could have a scenario where, let's say, just routine DDA meetings, the city attorney from one firm could be providing counsel. And then if we got into a rather complex and involved sale of land or some complex real estate question, we could have another firm advising the DDA in addition to the city attorney advising the DDA. How does that look, George?
You know, I don't know, because obviously I was more leaning towards the side that that we have one attorney in the past. So I understand the need for a special real estate attorney, and I guess I would see it as the city attorney, the regular city attorney advises the DDA most of the time. And then if there are special agreements and special contracts that you want reviewed or drafted, then we utilize a special real estate attorney from the DDA, I guess is what I would envision. But that's probably, I'd ask Adam or Tom to see what their thoughts were on how we would utilize this position.
That's how I envision it, George, is having the city attorney and then having this attorney specific to DDA, real estate deals, kind of a project by project, case by case basis.
So we might go months and not actually use that person until there's a draft agreements to ask about and so on. Okay.
I would agree, and I think that we would want to, have some input from the. Sorry, I'm having some horrible feedback here. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I would agree, and
It's not.
anyway, I agree.
So George, I would add, I think I'm in general agreement. So the one concept you identified was the need for a special expertise beyond what the ultimate city attorney could provide. And we won't know what that scenario looks like till we see who the city attorney is and what their horsepower is. And then the second one would be if you're a client and the city is one, the council is one client, DDA would be another client for the city law firm. And if you're a client, your lawyer has a fiduciary duty to you. So the city attorney, if they have their DDA hat on, would have a fiduciary duty to the DDA as well as to city council at the same time, or the city in general at the same time. So DDA as a client would be left to reckon with not only do we need special expertise beyond the city's law firm, but are there things that we don't know? I mean, what don't we know? What expertise and advice would this lawyer give us? And would this lawyer feel pressure from the city or from staff? And of course they wouldn't. I don't mean pressure in a negative sense. This is all hypothetical because I think we're all rowing in the same direction. So it's a tricky conversation to have, but we would want to assure that our lawyer is 100% advising the DDA. And so that would be a small footnote. And I think the DDA as a whole would be capable of determining if we can rely on the same counsel as the city. So that's the only slight nuance beyond the special expertise nuance.
It would be interesting then to see if council could select theirs first, which I think will happen, because if the DDA doesn't want to utilize the same firm, then that might throw a fly in the ointment here if some of these firms have applied for both. Right?
Yeah, yes, and if they have applied for both, yeah, I and others and council and staff and you, George, will have opinions on who would be best able to serve the city. That's sort of a broader undertaking, and
Yeah.
yeah, you should almost go first.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. I don't want to lose somebody, a firm, because the DDA selects them for a small amount of work, and then the city doesn't have that person for a huge amount of work, which obviously wouldn't want. But I think by sequence, that's a little bit of a problem for us because the DDA meets next Thursday.
Well, yeah, we meet next Thursday, but I think at the end of the day, we want the right process in place to select the appropriate firms. So if it makes sense for the council to make their decision first, then the DDA can certainly wait and make our decision. The only objection I would have to that is that we are presently in the middle of evaluating purchase and sale agreement where we could certainly use the expertise of legal counsel, and we have a clock ticking on an extension that we provided to a developer. So, there are needs that DDA presently has, but I agree with Jim's assessment. It almost seems to make sense for the council to make, or the city to make their determination first prior to DDA. What I do like about the conversation we're having is that the DDA has the autonomy to be able to independently select our own counsel depending on the needs of the DDA, and in particular for some of the more complex real estate transactions that we're involved with.
Yeah, I agree, Peter. I think we can solve that problem for council by waiting. I think it's prudent to do that. And I would say that in response to your good observation, Peter, about we're in the middle of something, any firm that the DDA were to hire will have the expertise to, if I can put it this way, rock on whatever questions we have and whatever documents we have and negotiations. There should be if city council moves, as George has described on the timeline, 3 weeks-ish, we should still have time to have our lawyer they can chew this stuff up in a few days and start to give us back and forth responses and so on. I don't see it as prejudicing us in any way. And in my viewpoint, were I on city council, from what I've seen, I would see these firms as being logically separate anyway. So ultimately, I personally wouldn't have a problem. I have firms in mind that would be great for council and firms that would be great for the task for which we're retaining them, and they're different firms. Or they might be different firms based on the overriding need of the city to have number one choice of representation.
Yeah, you're saying they could be different firms.
Yeah, they could be, and both parties would be very happy. Yeah, and very well represented.
Right. So George, just to make certain I'm clear, you said council likely would make a decision in 2 to 3 weeks?
That's the time frame as I see it, but just trying to lay it out in terms of weeks, because obviously Mr. Yaden completes his service with the city at the end of September, so we're quickly running out of time. So with the closing of the applications this Friday, I would think council would meet the next week, at least next week to week or two, to screen and then interview people and make a selection. So I'm guessing 2 weeks, 3 weeks the latest.
Would council have a special meeting with the express purpose just to make for a smooth transition from the outgoing city attorney to the new firm?
So I think they would just have a special meeting to hopefully to screen, and then potentially a second meeting to interview selected candidates is what I would guess. So.
Okay, Adam, yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And correct me wrong if I'm wrong with this understanding, but my impression was the DDA was looking for the Executive and Finance Committee to make a recommendation to the DDA. Is that correct? Did you guys?
We did have that conversation at a previous DDA meeting.
Okay.
I feel it's important given the scope of services that we're retaining, for all DDA members to have an opportunity to weigh in. And, you know, the DDA was kind enough to entrust that responsibility to myself and to Vice Chair Jim Kroom. But the way I feel, I'd like to make sure that the full DDA can offer their comments. And while I'm grateful for the trust that they've placed in me, I'd much rather have a collective conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for that clarification. Now, I guess I was also wondering, I guess one, when we're ready, would you like us to invite the respondents as panelists at that DDA meeting for questions, Q&A, or would you like staff to ask the respondents any specific questions?
It probably would make sense for them to be available in the event that there are questions.
Right.
I wonder if we should tell people that next week will just be a review and no selection, just knowing that council will be making a selection just past that time, so that people, you know, maybe next week we review it, ask questions, clarification, with the following meeting to make a selection, just so people don't do all this work and then we say, well, really, we should really wait an extra week for council to make their decision so we don't lose a candidate as city attorney. You know what I mean? And
what do you think, George? I think that's a good idea. What do you think, George, of having next week's meeting be the occasion where respondents to the RFP could be available for questions of the DDA?
I don't know. It might be premature because we might be removing. I mean, if we don't want the same firm, and I understand that one of the firms is going to be applying for both, it just seems like we might be removing one of the firms from, if we in fact want two different firms representing. You know, it just seems like we might be removing one, and it might then not be a useful way to spend the time. But
I see. Okay.
I'm fine with either option. Just obviously, my overriding concern is the full city attorney, just because it's a tremendous amount of work for the city, you know, in terms of the importance of it and the amount of hours we use with that city attorney process. But
so George, so you would suggest that maybe it simply be the form of a report. We had the executive committee meeting. Here's what we discussed, and there should be a logical order of the selections, and leave it at that. We don't do it. I mean, we just push our process entirely so that your process is clean.
That's fine. Or just present what we presented today. Here are the applications. Here's the prices, and they all, you know, will, because city attorney is also being selected by council, we should, you know, let's give them 2 weeks to finish their process and then come back and do our selection after that. Because then at least we know who they've selected at that point. And then we know if we're not stepping on their toes, right? But
yeah,
makes sense to me. But
my only fear is that the council doesn't make a decision in 2 to 3 weeks.
They would have to, Peter, because our city attorney's office is leaving. So the October 1, there's no one to prosecute city ordinance violations. The court has no attorneys. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a drop dead thing that we'd have to make that selection. I mean, not me, I don't make the selection, but I think council would really have to make that selection in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah.
Did you say that the closing date is tomorrow?
Yes. What's today? Yes, tomorrow, Friday, at the end of the day, I believe, is the closing for the applications.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to have special meetings over the next 2 weeks to have that selection done to start the transition.
And I'm sure that George and staff will let council know, I mean, the urgency of their decision. They already know that, and report from this meeting that
we're waiting
extra urgent because we're waiting and accommodating council.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've, you know, clearly thought this through of what an appropriate approach is, so we don't impede our ability nor the council or city's ability to select the appropriate firm. So why don't we leave it at that unless there's some additional comments, and then we will next week just have a summary of our conversation today, and then we can wait on the council's decision. If everyone agrees to that.
Great.
All right. Thank you for providing that information and background. Are there any board members' announcements or comments? Seeing none, I move to adjourn the meeting and ask for a second.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and supported. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you. We'll see you.